Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. It's a pleasure to have you with us for this webinar and to discuss how we can better prepare students for the examination for the Certificate of Competency, the famous ECCE. We're going to be talking about general preparation guidelines and focusing on writing in particular. So my name is Fernando Flurking. I'm the Director of Marketing, Communications, and Stakeholder Relations Department from within Michigan Language Assessment. And I'm joined by my colleague, Emily Clifford, our Academic Services Manager, who's been really busy preparing several resources for preparation for the ECCE and for other exams. Thanks for sending us your questions in advance. When you register, we designed the webinar around your questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. And if not, anyway, that is great feedback for us so that we can prepare other types of preparation materials that we know you need. So let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. You can mention your country, where you are at this point, and let's get started. We're going to be covering during this hour some new preparation resources that we have for ECCE. We'll talk about the expectations for the B2 level that ECCE is designed for, and we'll go over all the different sections, but especially focusing on the writing section, and we'll share a few samples to show you how students are performing and what we can learn from them. We're basically sharing our experience in the classroom and many years of preparing students ourselves as well. So we'll combine that expertise with your feedback throughout the session. So we have a very experienced audience from what you told us in your registration form. Most of you have been preparing students for ECCE for more than 10 years. You can see percentages there. And it's not only ECCE that most of you are preparing students for. The majority have been working on ECPE as well. In terms of, one of the questions was to ask you about the sections that you thought students considered most difficult, and you thought that by far writing is the most difficult section. So we're going to be focusing on that one in particular. But following that, the most difficult section seems to be reading. And we have some resources as well that we'll share in a minute. And then listening and speaking. So it seems that students are doing much better in speaking than in writing. We'll need to help them with that. And the majority of your questions were also about writing. So we'll try to answer as many as we can as well. So Emily will share a few good news in terms of what we're doing with ECCE and new resources. Emily?
Thank you, Fernando. And it's very nice to be joining everyone. Thank you for attending this afternoon. So yeah, as Fernando said, we really want to answer a lot of the questions that we received from you as part of this webinar. And as you can see here, we received a few questions regarding general preparation for ECCE, as well as pre-preparation materials. So I'm very happy to let you know about a new resource that is coming very, very soon. It's the ECCE Preparation Guide for Teachers. And I'll talk a little bit more detail about that resource in a moment. But I also wanted to ask you for your feedback. Which resources do you use to prepare students for ECCE at the moment? We do have some on our website already. You will find the ECCE Writing Resource Pack on our michiganassessment.org website, along with a list of publishers that have published preparation materials for our exams. So we'd love to hear from you about what it is that you're using already. And something else that we're really excited to let you know about is that there will be new ECCE and ECPE sample tests released in 2024. So I'm very excited about that. I hope you are as well. We'll move on to talk about the preparation guide. So this has been designed with teachers in mind, with lots and lots of detailed information about the CEFR and expectations for B2 level, which, as you'll know, that's the ECCE certifies competency at the B2 level. The guide also includes lots of sample items for each section, along with some teaching and preparation tips for every section and all of the skills that are tested. And it will be available for free download by the end of this month. So it's coming very, very soon.
Yeah, as you all know, the ECCE, the examination for the Certificate of Competency in English, has been administered all around the world through authorized test centers since 1993. You're all familiar with the basic information about the exam, the content, the sections, timing, the format, the tasks. So we're not spending too much time on that. But if we move on to the next one, part of your questions were related to the level of difficulty of ECC and what is expected of students at this level. Well, we're basically following the guidelines from CEFR, the Common European Framework, for the B2 level. So you have a lot of information about that and what defines that level, what characterizes students' proficiency at this high intermediate level of proficiency, obviously. And they can use language fluently, accurately, effective on a wide range of general, academic, and vocational or leisure topics. You can read everything yourselves. They can express clearly without much sign of having to restrict what they want to say. They have a sufficient range of language to be able to give clear descriptions, express viewpoints, develop arguments. They can understand main ideas. They can interact with a degree of fluency and spontaneity that makes regular interaction with users of the target language quite possible without imposing strain on either party. You can refer to descriptions of CFR in terms to evaluate whether you think students are ready for the exam or not. These are the general expectations that the exam is designed for.
Thank you, Fernando. So we'll go through some of the sections of the exam now. As Fernando already said, I know many of you have been teaching the exam for quite some time, but we just want to go through as a refresher and try to answer some of your questions as we talk about the different sections. So first, we'll talk about ECCE listening. There are two parts to the listening section with 45 questions, and it lasts 45 minutes. Part one involves short conversations with multiple choice questions. These answer options are always presented as 3 images, and test takers choose the most appropriate image to answer the question. And each of these conversations is played once. And then with part 2, these are short talks by a single speaker or monologues, also followed by multiple choice questions. And each of these talks is played twice. So from the audience, we were asked about listening techniques, how to help students succeed in the listening section, and specifically what should students pay attention to when listening to part 2. So I hope that some of these tips will help answer those questions. With the listening section, the skills, global skills, local skills, and inferential skills are all tested. Global being main idea, local is more detailed information, and inferential is the information that is not explicitly given. And we would recommend any time you complete a listening activity in class, trying to incorporate one of each or an activity to practice each of these skills every time, so that students really get used to answering questions about the main idea, then looking for detailed information and making inferences as well. Always encourage active listening. So students shouldn't be passively just listening. They need to be given a clear goal and a task to complete for every listening activity they do. And with listening, you can split it into 3 main sections, I suppose. You have your pre-listening, things you do before the activity. And this can include things like building vocabulary, pre-teaching background knowledge, having them predict content, perhaps by looking at some pictures or looking at the title of the listening activity, and making sure they read the questions before they listen, so they really have something clear to listen to. Then while they're listening, as I said, there should be activities where they have to identify the main idea or the gist of what they're listening to. They should be inferring an opinion or drawing a conclusion. And finally, identifying specific details that are given in the listening. We were asked about listening part 2, and something that will really help for listening part 2 is teaching and practicing note-taking skills. They are allowed to take notes during the listening section. And because these talks are a little bit longer, it can be helpful for them to learn how to make notes while they listen, so they can have the key information. And then finally, with post-listening, once the listening activity is finished, and during the class, you can have discussions about the content. The transcripts can be a very useful tool to confirm details of the listening and have the students check for anything they misunderstood. And finally, complete some kind of follow-up writing or speaking activity to clarify and extend their knowledge on the topic. So we'll move on to reading. For reading, as I'm sure you know, there are 3 parts, 65 questions, and the reading section is 75 minutes long. The first part consists of multiple choice grammar questions, where students or test takers complete the sentence with the correct word or phrase. Then part 2 is similarly styled. It's 14 multiple choice vocabulary questions. So they will be given a sentence which they need to complete with the correct word or phrase. Part 3 then has both single text reading passages and a set of multiple text reading passages with multiple choice questions. So similar with the listening, we had some general questions about reading, just for some tips, exam tips for reading. And then we had a couple more specific questions as well. How can we teach students to read between the lines, or answering inference questions? And what is the purpose of asking what object pronouns refer to? We'll start with that one, the object pronouns refer to. So this is something that will help not just with reading, but with writing as well. In reading, writers will often, rather than repeating a noun or a proper noun multiple times, to aid the cohesion of the writing, they will replace that noun with a pronoun. And it's really important that test takers are able to understand what is being referred to with those pronouns to avoid any misunderstandings. And so they're really able to understand the whole meaning of what they're reading. And then this can also improve their writing, because if they're seeing these examples and understanding how pronouns and reference are used, they're then able to incorporate that into their own writing and improve their own coherence and cohesion of their writing. So, Fernando, do you have anything to add about that?
No, that's fine. They will have to understand pronoun references as part of a whole passage, obviously, and that's part of our everyday language.
Exactly. And then with reading between the lines, as I said, this comes under the inferential skills that are tested on ECCE, where test takers need to understand things that are perhaps not directly stated in a reading passage. And this is a really important skill for them to practice. In the preparation guide, there is a bit more detailed information about inference skills, particularly in reading, and some example activities. But things like having students read through a text and sort different statements from what they're reading into explicit facts and opinions, and then talking about which language clues led them to understand that this was an opinion that perhaps wasn't directly given. Another thing they can do is encouraging test takers or students to consider their background knowledge of a topic, and they can read the explicit information given, think how that relates to their background knowledge, and then draw a conclusion from both what's been explicitly given, what they already know, and then draw a conclusion about perhaps what the author's opinion might be, or what might happen next. So as with listening, it's really important to practice all 3 of these sort of sub-skills: global skills, local skills, and inferential skills, every time you complete a reading activity in class. And again, as with listening, encourage active reading. So it's really important and helpful to give learners a very clear goal and a task to complete for any type of reading activity. For pre-reading, again, building vocabulary, which will help with all aspects of ECCE, not just reading. Activating background knowledge, they could research the topic or have some class discussions about what they already know about the topic. They can predict the content based on headlines or images, and then read the reading questions first before they begin. Then again, while reading, identify the main idea, infer an opinion, and identify the details. They should always be practicing skimming and scanning, as well as reading closely. These are all important skills that they need to practice for the ECCE and just for reading in general. And then finally, for post-reading, once you've read the passage and answered some questions, have class discussions or small group discussions about the content, have students summarize or paraphrase the text, and perhaps elicit a creative response, have them write from a different perspective or from a different character or giving a different side of an argument. And finally, before we get into the detailed writing section, we'll talk about speaking for a moment. So for speaking, the speaking examination is conducted in person with one test taker and one examiner. There are 4 stages to the ECCE speaking section, with each stage getting progressively more linguistically challenging. The test takers will be asked to ask and answer questions, provide suggestions or a recommendation, present and justify a decision, and discuss a topic in detail. And these are all things that can be practiced in the classroom. And on the next slide, we'll look at some ideas for that. So the speaking rating scale, this is how the certified raters rate the speaking exam. The categories, it's a very long rating scale. We don't have time to go into it in too much detail, but the categories are the overall communicative effectiveness, the language control and resources, including grammar and vocabulary, and finally, delivery and intelligibility, so fluency and hesitation, intonation, things like that. So for speaking preparation, speaking in a foreign language can be, quite anxiety inducing. So something that's really important is to help build the confidence of the students. This can be done by giving them material to prepare in advance. This could be learning relevant vocabulary, perhaps they research a topic or come up with some recommendations for a situation. They can collaborate with other students, either giving prepared presentations, some kind of dramatic performance, or something more spontaneous. And it's important to begin with prepared activities, give them time to prepare. And then as they become more confident, you can reduce that preparation time and have them speaking much more spontaneously. Classroom activities that you design to prepare for ECCE speaking should include descriptions of possible courses of action, discussing advantages and disadvantages, and always supporting choices and statements with reasons and explanations. Fernando, do you have anything that you'd like to add about speaking? I've been talking a lot, I'm sorry.
No problem. And their test takers their students seem to be doing very well in speaking, so we don't need to elaborate more on this. Let's get into writing.
Okay.
So on the top, you can see some of the questions that we received, the format of the writing tasks for the ECCE, is there a word limit, is word count important, minimum number of words. There were lots of questions about how many words are necessary in order to pass the ECCE writing. You're familiar with the format of the test. They have 2 options. The first one is either an email or a letter, and the other one will be an essay. There is no word limit for the task. They can respond in any way. What counts is really the quality of the responses. It's not a minimum number of words that they have to use. Don't ask them to count the number of words that they have used in the essay or waste time, precious time during the test doing that. We have Lisa coming in. And what counts really is the quality of the responses. That's what we'll see with samples that we will share today. The ECCE, we have a team of trained certified raters that are working on scoring for ECCE, and they're very experienced. They are kind of recertified in order to be able to continue doing that. So you can trust that their evaluations, we'll talk a little about this in a minute, are highly reliable. The level of difficulty in terms of writing, there were several questions about what is expected in terms of ECCE writing and how to prepare for them for this particular section. You see in bold, like at least to highlight the most important areas, what is expected of students at this B2 level as well, which is what ECCE reflects. They need to be able to produce clear, detailed texts on a variety of subjects, synthesizing and evaluating information, arguments. Well, Lisa is trying to fix the chat problem. Give clear, detailed descriptions of real, imaginary events. Write an essay or report which develops an argument systematically. Evaluating ideas or solutions to a problem. Writing a report or an essay or report which develops an argument, giving reasons in support or against a particular point of view, and explaining advantages and disadvantages of various ideas, various options. So you can see what is expected in terms of the topics, the areas, the types of writing that they're expected to be able to produce, the quality of language, the kind of language that they're using, the genre, the vocabulary, grammar structures that are necessary in order to express themselves fluently in a detailed way, without any general difficulties for the reader to follow what they're trying to explain. In terms of vocabulary layer, we'll talk about that later, but you have this information there. In terms of scoring, there were several questions as well, as you can see in the next slide. The rating scale for writing is on our website. You can study it in detail. We're not getting into each of the different score bands here, but as I was explaining, the writing section is evaluated by trained raters that are certified to be able to do this. The criteria that they use is basically what is in the rubrics and how to interpret those rubrics. So we have calibration sessions with them on a regular basis to make sure that they understand and use the rubric appropriately for these purposes. We'll talk about the specific areas as we discuss the different samples now. But there were a few questions about handwriting, spelling, and like the mechanics in some way of how students are expressing themselves. You will see by yourselves how that might affect when you're trying to read something and follow the idea. But as long as the ideas are clearly expressed, and there might be some spelling errors, there might be some punctuation errors. If handwriting is impossible to read, we cannot really decipher what they are trying to say in that case. But it's important for them to try to explain main ideas and the content that they're trying to use in order to respond to the prompts in the best possible way. And if they need to improve their handwriting, encourage them to do so. But as long as it's something that people can read and we can follow, it will not be they will not be penalized only because of their handwriting. So these are the main areas within the rating scale: content and development, organization and connection of ideas, linguistic range and control, and communicative effect. We'll look a little more in detail on each of these categories, but you can see what is included under each of those areas. Content and development, they have to respond to the task. It has to be relevant to the prompt that they're trying to respond. And the quality of ideas is what really counts, and how they are developing their argument and the details that they're including, how they're really answering the specific prompt and with their own, in their own language, with their own ideas. The second category is how they organize ideas and how they link those ideas, which is very important in writing. The third category is more about the linguistic range and control. What is their command of the language in terms of grammar, vocabulary, the range of vocabulary that they're using, simple grammar structures, more complex structures used appropriately. If there are errors, do those errors really affect the general message, and do they impair comprehension? And the communicative effect is how, whether the essay or the different responses that they produce, do they accomplish the communicative goals that they were asked to do? Do they address the prompt? Is it written in the right genre? Do they establish some kind of context? Do they use the right register? So let's look at the tasks themselves and one of the first samples. We move on.
Just before we move on, Fernando, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to mention about the chat and the Q&A. If you're having difficulty submitting questions in the chat, please send through to the Q&A. We're able to see those questions and we'll do our best to answer them for you.
Thanks. Okay, so writing tasks. We'll see a few samples now, but to begin with, when you see an email or when students get the writing section, they will have two options. In this case, for this particular exam, they got an option of an email or an essay. The two tasks are mentioned here. The email begins with a topic. In this case, the principal of a local high school wants to require students to spend the first 10 minutes of every class doing physical exercise led by their teacher. He wants to know what students think of this idea. So that's the general topic. And then in the next sections, we define the purpose, the gender, and the audience that students will have to consider. They have to write an email. That's the main purpose of this writing task, the assignment. The audience will be the principal, so it has to be slightly more formal language than the language that they would use when they're chatting with their own friends. And they have to give reasons to support their ideas. Start your email, dear Principal Brown. So let's look at one example here. And as we read this, I will also, well, as soon as we finish with this one, I will launch a poll to see whether you think it's highly satisfactory, a satisfactory, or an unsatisfactory sample in this case. Emily, can you read this one?
Sure. Dear Principal Brown, as an active member of our high school community, I am writing to you to express my opinion on whether or not students should do physical exercises in the beginning of each class. On the positive side, exercising before every class will help students take out the energy they've been given from the break, where they were talking with their friends and having fun. This will help them clear off their mind and concentrate on their lesson. It may also help students feel more active, especially during the first couple teaching hours when they've just woken up. Adding up, doing daily workouts like these will benefit both the students and the teacher's physical shape. It can probably be a fun activity that they'll look forward to as well. On the negative side, the lessons time will be reduced, and so teachers will push their students more in order to be able to teach them what needs to be taught in a shorter period of time. Furthermore, some teachers might be inexperienced. This will cause them to show their children incorrect exercises, which could even lead to them getting injuries. Last but not least, some kids with physical disabilities will not be able to participate in such activities. This will result in them feeling alone and maybe even left out. To sum up, I believe that this activity will benefit the students, but in my opinion, it should be optional rather than obligatory. I hope my opinion will prove useful and that my views will be taken under consideration with great respect.
So you can tell us what you think in terms of how this test taker did, and we'll analyze it a little bit as the all continues there. Can you go on to the next slide? In terms of content and development, the test taker wrote an email to Principal Brown, well done, stating the purpose of the email in paragraph 1, and then devoting 2 paragraphs to the positive and negative sides of this argument, and finishing with the recommendation in his conclusion. In terms of organization and connection of ideas, ideas are clearly organized. Paragraphs are coherent, cohesive. The ideas are relevant to the topic and support the main topic of each paragraph. The writer makes really good use of transitional phrases, as you can see. In terms of linguistic range and control, the writer uses simple as well as complex structures appropriately and accurately. They're correctly used. There are gerund phrases, adjective phrases, more complex structures in general, and has very good use of vocabulary, which is appropriate for this particular context. A few occasional errors are not really distracting. And in terms of a communicative effect, the register, the tone of the message, the language that is used are all appropriate for this kind of more formal type of email to Principal Brown. The email is addressed to Principal Brown and demonstrates awareness of the audience as an active member of our high school community, as he mentioned from the beginning. And let's see, this is what you thought. This sample is highly satisfactory. A few of you thought 62% felt it was highly satisfactory and 35% satisfactory. This was rated as a high pass. It's a highly satisfactory sample. So let's go on to the next one. In this case, we're going to see the essay. The task here was, is it better to spend money on experiences like cooking lessons rather than on material items like new clothes? Write an essay on whether you agree or disagree with the statement above. Include specific reasons and examples to support your opinion. So Emily will read it again and think about it, whether it's a highly satisfactory or a satisfactory or an unsatisfactory performance in this case.
Okay, nowadays people tend to favor buying material items instead of spending their hard-earned money on experiences. I personally believe that material items are not as important in our lives as experiences. Excuse me, sorry. First and foremost, material items like clothes, accessories do not last forever. They wear off, break, and become useless. For instance, our taste in clothes changes as we mature, and buying them is nothing more than a temporary feeling of happiness. The reason why experiences mean much more to me is because they last forever and are there to remind me how beautiful and majestic life is. Traveling can change your life and open your eyes to all the opportunities waiting for you outside of your small, meaningless world. Furthermore, you get the opportunity to meet new friends and experience things you are used to. Nevertheless, some people treat material items like they are the most important thing in this world, and it's mainly because they haven't felt the joy of meeting new cultures, learning a new skill, or doing extreme sports. All in all, I personally believe that experiences are the most important and fulfilling aspect of our lives, and I encourage everyone to try out something easy like cooking lessons or learning a new instrument, because it can change your life.
What do you think of this sample? So you continue responding. The first area, content and development. The essay is fully developed with a variety of supporting details. The writer states his thesis statement in paragraph 1, showing a preference for experiences over material items. Then the writer justifies his opinion. Material items do not last forever. Paragraph 2. Then the reasons why experiences might mean more in paragraph 3, and reasons why other people may value material things in paragraph 4, concluding with recommendations to the reader. That is very well done. In terms of the organization and connection of ideas, ideas are clearly organized. There are clear paragraphs, very clearly defined paragraphs to explore different main ideas in each of them. And all those ideas are supporting the main argument. A variety of transition markers are used, as you can see, to connect the ideas within each paragraph and between paragraphs. Good range of grammar structures is used as well, accurately and appropriately, and vocabulary is appropriate for the context. For example, traveling can change your life and open your eyes to all the opportunities waiting for you outside of your small, meaningless world. That's a very interesting sentence. There are a few minor errors, occasional errors, but they don't affect comprehension of the general message. And the essay shows a good example of communicative effect. The writer starts about what people do in general. People tend to favor buying material items instead of spending, so understanding the context that from his own experience. And then in paragraph 4, he recognizes other people's perspectives by describing why some people may value material things. And the writer ends the essay by encouraging the reader, or I encourage everyone, the writer says, to try out something easy, like cooking lessons or learning a new instrument, because it can change your life. It's kind of more engaging. It's trying to motivate the readers to do something else based on that. So the results were divided between highly satisfactory and satisfactory. This was high pass as well. Another example of an essay in this case. So a few tips to keep working on writing and activities for the classroom.
Okay, so some questions we got from the audience about writing. Everyone wants to know how to get a high pass. That came up quite a few times. So we wanted to give you some tips for how to improve the scores and how to reach those higher grades. The best way to improve writing skills really is to write as much as possible. Keep practicing, keep writing as much as you can. And it's important for students as well as teachers to really become familiar with the rating scale. So test takers understand how they're being rated, and then they're able to reflect and self-assess their work and check that they've, covered everything that's needed for each of the different criteria on the writing scale. Planning is very important. They don't have a huge amount of time to write, so it's important that they're able to get a plan very quickly to be able to write something very comprehensive and that covers everything they need to. Work with students to develop content development strategies, how to come up with ideas quickly, how to organize their ideas logically and appropriately, and then how to elaborate on those ideas and provide details and supporting information that really enhances the writing. Expanding vocabulary helps with all aspects of the ECCE, as does improving the range of grammar structures. Able to use more complex structures accurately and effectively will get those higher marks. They need to be able to use linking words appropriately and really understand and pay attention to the context in which they're writing and the audience for whom they're writing, which is stated in the question. For developing ideas, and again, this came up quite a lot in the questions, how can we help students develop their ideas and elaborate and develop points, and how to find ideas on an unfamiliar topic. So helping students become familiar with current events can really help. This is a useful classroom technique. Ask students to report on news or other topics that they're interested in, but perhaps are not familiar with and need to find out more information. Have students discuss and write about interesting news stories. Propose topics and elicit students' opinions, get them thinking, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And similarly, present problems and ask students to come up with solutions for those problems. identify 5 pros and cons on a controversial topic. These are all things you can do in the classroom to practice coming up with ideas on the spot. And we've also got some brainstorming strategies here for you. Brainstorming should be 3 to 5 minutes of an activity, uninterrupted time. All ideas count. Write down everything that you're thinking, and just get as much down as you can in those 3 to 5 minutes, either individually or in groups. And then take a moment to look at what's been written and group those ideas into categories, related or unrelated. It could be pros and cons or semantic maps. Then have the students select the most relevant ones for the assignment. They're not going to be able to write all of their ideas, but hopefully they'll have a lot and they can choose which ones are the most relevant. And then they can start writing topic sentences and identifying their supporting details. So I think we're going to look at another essay sample now.
Yeah, let's look at one more essay. In this case, the task said governments in every country should give their citizens a free passport when they turn 16 years old. You have to write an essay on whether you agree or disagree with the statement above, including reasons, specific reasons and details to support your opinion. So we will do the same. We'll have a poll at the end once we finish with this one. Do you want to read it, Emily?
Sure. Nowadays, we hear a lot of crimes every day. We with fake passports and others. The governments maybe must do something for this. For example, they should do a gift in their citizens when they become 16. A gift like a passport from the government. To begin with, the advantages of this choice for gift. Firstly, all teenagers from 16 and up have a new passport and they are written in files or police. Secondly, they ban the cause of crime and the teenagers have no passport. However, as we know, rarely happen a crime from teenagers. At the end, the people want to save money and the passport is not free and it is not easy to move it. On the other hand, there are disadvantages because all things have both advantages and disadvantages. If they make the passport, there are a big percent to happen a mistake in last name, height, and others. All in all, it's good for the government and for the families. The only thing which we must be scared is the case of a mistake.
Okay, thank you. So, launch the poll. Let's see what you think. Funny to see how it moves and getting all your responses. So in terms of continent development, it's not fully accomplished in terms of the tasks that we were asking them. This is a very interesting sample to analyze. The task requirements are not really fulfilled, at least completely. But there are some good aspects about this one. The prompt asks whether the writer agrees or disagrees with the idea that governments should give free passports to citizens when they are 16. There is some content in response to that prompt. There are some ideas that are related to that, but several ideas are not really relevant to the topic. There are references to crimes and mistakes in passports, and people want to save money, and the passport is not free, the writer says, but the prompt was saying that the passports are going to be issued at no cost. So I don't know if the prompt or the task are not clearly understood from what the writer says here. Some other ideas are not clearly expressed. Like there are disadvantages because all things have both advantages and disadvantages. At the top of a second column there. That is not really something that is contributing to the argument or the topic that he has to elaborate on. On the bright side, on the positive side, there are some linking phrases that are used to begin with, and firstly, and secondly, however, on the other hand. But those ideas are not really coherently organized or adequately connected just because there are kind of sequence markers or linking phrases like those. There are many errors throughout the essay, as you can see. And if we counted the number of words in this case, it may be similar to other essays or other samples before. I think it might be more than 200 words, but just the number of words will not really make a difference in that sense. The great majority, the overwhelming majority of you thought this was an unsatisfactory sample. And this is not satisfactory. This does not meet the expectations for a B2 level essay for the ECCE. So back to you, Emily.
So some things that we can do to help students develop an argument. The first thing we would recommend is to analyze lots and lots and lots of examples of both written and spoken arguments, learning about rhetorical devices and techniques that are used, and having students practice incorporating them into their own work. So analyze good examples of an argument and then use those same techniques in their own writing. Classroom debates can also be helpful for writing as well as speaking. I know people often think of debate as just being for speaking, but debate topics cover, a wide range of things, including the domain areas of the ECCE. And it involves students preparing arguments, and then they can, rather than speaking it, they could write it down. Thinking about opposing viewpoints, supporting their ideas as much as possible. Similarly, just basic speaking activities where students justify an opinion or preference can help develop arguments for writing. When they're thinking spontaneously while discussing a topic and coming up with ideas, topics of personal interest, it can help learners develop their ability to support their response with additional information. And once these skills have been practiced, they'll feel more confident developing arguments on less familiar topics.
Thank you.
Apologies.
And this is a kind of a very easy activity to prepare that can help students analyze written samples, but also become more aware of their own, how their own writing might work and how effective it might be. Using any written sample to analyze anything from a textbook, anything that they wrote, anything that their classmates wrote in some way. Prepare a table like this one and choosing areas that you want to focus on. Maybe it doesn't have to be all of them at once, some of them at a time, but you choose and you can word them in the way that you prefer to make them more, make them easier to understand for students, especially. But most of these are areas taken from the scoring rubric for the ECCE writing section from that we already looked at, and we analyzed 3 samples of performance at different levels. So you can ask them to read something and identify where is the main argument, which one is it, and they can write it here. So they can, by writing, they're also not only reading but also thinking, and as they analyze the writing sample that they're looking at, where they identify all this information and the different connections that the information provided in those essays or in those articles that might be important for them. Where are those supporting details? How many arguments maybe you want to ask instead of just the main argument or the main thesis statement, but there may be how many main ideas are there mentioned here, and which are the supporting details? How do you see what kind of paragraph organization is used in this case? Which transition phrases are used? Maybe showing sequence like first, next, last, or first, second, other markers of different kinds, but also, I don't know, however, nevertheless, or to begin with. There are different types of markers for different transition phrases for different purposes. What kind of grammar structures are being used? Can you identify more complex structures, or is the essay made up of short, simple sentences that are effectively used, but they're still at a more beginning level? They can be effective in terms of how they communicate that message, but at the B2 level, they're expected to also be able to manage more complex structures. What kind of errors do you see? Are there important errors that affect the comprehension of the message, or you can still continue reading without being distracted by the errors, without having to think, what did he say here? What does this mean? Or what kind of vocabulary is used? Are they aware of the audience? Are they writing something for an audience? Is the register, the kind of writing appropriate for this particular context? And again, you can choose the categories that you want, but I've done this several times, and it's been useful for students to see somebody else's writing. It's more objective in that case. They're not analyzing themselves, but by going over more systematically all these different categories, they can become more aware of what they do themselves with their own writing and later evaluate their own samples. And this one is also another idea to help students organize content. All these activities are obviously for the classroom. They're not to be done during the day of the test, but it's helping them develop the skills that they need in order to feel more confident with the writing section, knowing how to create, how to come up with content, how to kind of develop ideas in an organized way, how to write coherent language in general, and do better in this section in particular. Some of these graphic organizers that might be useful, these are also I'm sure you're using them for different purposes, but especially to plan and to make students aware of what they can do with when they are preparing for ECCE writing. They can use different graphic organizers that you propose or that they choose by themselves in some cases, but depending on the type of writing assignment that you're giving them, you can select the most appropriate type of organizer for that particular task to think about the planning the whole paragraph structure, the organization, the whole essay, or you can keep it at the paragraph level in some way. This will help them organize ideas into paragraph and decide if they have enough supporting details, if they need more. Well, no, I'm just saying this main idea, but this is not enough in order to support or to convince an audience that this is what I think, and these are the reasons why I think that this is important. They can evaluate whether they have enough for all the different paragraphs, like for example, that spider map. Each of those different areas might be the main idea of a different paragraph. So if they have 4 paragraphs, how many main supporting details do they need in order to support that idea? To avoid repetition, to organize and connect different ideas, to then think about how they are connecting paragraph 1 with paragraph 2 and what kind of transition markers they might use between those ideas. The T-chart, if you are talking about advantages and disadvantages, or something that is more like 2 sides of a problem, might be more useful for those purposes. You can choose the better graphic organizer for those purposes. But for classroom activities, this is visualizing helps a lot in terms of helping them come up with ideas and think about how much information they need in order to develop and support ideas in an accurate and appropriate way.
So just to finish off with the preparation tips, we wanted to talk about some specific things for preparing for the exam. And we will be having some new webinars for test takers in November, so please look out for those. And we'll go into more detail with that. But in order to prepare for the exam, it's really important that students, test takers, practice writing by hand, not on a computer, because they will need to be writing by hand in the exam. And similarly, practice timed writing. So you can start by giving them slightly more time than the exam allows, but gradually reduce the time allowed until they're practicing and able to write these written responses with slightly less time than they have in the real exam. Develop a series of short 3-minute plans on a variety of topics so that they get used to planning, coming up with ideas, organizing those ideas, and planning the content for their written responses very quickly but effectively. And as we said before, keep writing as much as possible is the best way to practice and prepare for ECCE writing.
Great. I think this is getting closer to the end. We have a few questions that you sent through the Q&A section. And sorry about the chat. I was disappointed that it was not working. But there were questions about a few questions that we can still have a couple of minutes to answer. There was a question about what is meant by prompt-specific vocabulary or language from the prompt. The test takers will usually refer to language from the prompt, but sometimes they overuse and repeat the same information that is mentioned in the prompt without really elaborating on their own ideas. Just relying on language taken from the prompt is not really going to help them. They have to refer to what it is, but as you saw in these highly satisfactory samples of performance, they were providing their own ideas. They were elaborating, giving their own opinions. They can agree with side A or side B of the argument. We don't have any specific answer that we're expecting for that purpose, but they have to elaborate with appropriate language and not just the vocabulary or the language taken from the prompt. They have to use a wide range of vocabulary, structures, simple, more complex. And repetition of vocabulary is referring to the same. If it's only using the same type of words, the same, I don't know, it's very interesting, and it's very interesting, and it's very interesting, and it's very interesting. He doesn't, the writer doesn't have, doesn't show at least command of an appropriate level of vocabulary or language in general. While writing an essay, should the test taker analyze the arguments from their viewpoint, or should they also mention the arguments against? In all, as you saw, the different prompts mention what you have to do. You show your opinion, why you support, agree or disagree with this idea. We saw an example of one of the prompts that was saying, I think this is the main idea that I think, and it explains why. Other people think about this in this way and why. I understand that. But so it's exploring the topic from different points of view, and especially making sure that they really follow the requests from the prompt. I organize ideas in my mind. I often insist. Yeah, there's a question about how they come up with ideas and organize, asking them to prepare a brief outline and spend or waste in their minds in some way a couple of minutes at the beginning thinking about it without starting to write from the beginning of a limited time to have to work on that will be really useful, either in their minds, but kind of jotting down a few ideas to help them, okay, main idea is this one, and then this is how I'm going to write it down, so that they know, and when they're writing, they know exactly how they can divide their time and make sure that they cover all the different important points that they want to get across. So we will share, we will send the slides when in a week or so, once we finish processing everything, and we will have another webinar on ECPE right after this one. We'll have both of these presentations ready. We appreciate your time joining us for this session today, and we'll be in touch. You have our contact information here if you have to reach about anything that we need, and you can also work with all our test centers that are working with you more directly in that sense. But I hope you found some useful ideas for your classes and to help students to prepare for ECC. All the best of luck and enjoy the weekend.